character design is hard. That's why I created a character and recorded the process, so you can see how a professional artist designs a character. And to make it even more interesting, I decided to create a god. To begin with, before you start drawing and looking for references, you need to sit down and write an idea. The idea doesn't need to be very good or original. The only thing you need is for it to work. And that's what I did. I sat down, and after thinking for a while, I wrote this. Omethurma, the goddess of oceans, lost knowledge and faith. In this medieval fantasy world, the people who live near the sea pray to her, so they can fish in peace and hope that nothing bad happens. She is also venerated by some scholars, hoping that she will grant them lost knowledge, drowned with time. As you can see, this concept is quite basic and doesn't have anything special, but that's where the important part lies. It's okay if the character doesn't say much on paper. Our job is to make it visually interesting. Then you might think that now is the time to gather references and start designing. But no, that's where you're wrong. What I do, and what I always recommend, is to sketch fresh ideas first, without letting references influence them. These sketches don't need to be well drawn as long as you can understand them yourself. I usually add a few notes to make sure I remember what I intended with each sketch. This is really useful for getting rid of bad or generic ideas and slowly arriving at more interesting concepts. For example, you can see that the sketch 1 is a sea goddess sitting on an oyster, wearing a crown, something pretty generic. But since I've already drawn it, I free up space in my brain for new ideas, like sketch 2, where the goddess' hair is the embodiment of the ocean, something I actually like a lot. Then in sketch 3, she has a ring of water around her, representing the sea, and she's playing with ships. You get the idea, right? Here, the most important thing is to play with concepts and to reuse the ideas you like by changing or modifying them into something you like even more. For example, in concept 6, I reuse the idea of the hair being the ocean, along with having an object made of water that represents the sea, and she's playing with the ships. Once you made enough, choose the ones you like the most, and that's the best moment to look for references you like and that can help you with the improvement of the concepts. In my case, I decided to keep concepts 3, 6, and 7, developing them and making them more interesting. Since this is a personal project, everything is quite roughly sketched, because I can understand it myself. But it's recommended to make the concepts visually clearer if you're working for someone else. In the same way, it's also recommended that you give a like and subscribe since it helps me a lot. Thank you! As you can see, by keeping the most interesting ideas, you can further develop the same concepts to make them better. For example, in concept 1, the water ring was originally horizontal, but I decided to make it diagonal to add a bit of dynamism, although it didn't turn out very well. I also played with the design of the tail, adding some elements to break up the flat shape. By the way, I like to apply a dark gray behind the sketches so I can see whether the silhouette works or not. So, concept 3 does have a strong silhouette. The elements are easy to identify and the shapes are both interesting and fluid, as well as distinctive. But unfortunately, concept 2 doesn't have such a good silhouette. The torso and the book merge too much, leaving no negative space to create interesting shapes. So, with everything explained, you probably say the best choice is concept 3. And you'd be right, 3 is technically better. But I decided to go with another one, concept 2. It's important to emphasize that nothing here is final until the end. That means if something doesn't convince me, but I still like the idea, I can modify it and improve it. That's exactly why I chose Concept 2. Even though it isn't technically the strongest, I like it much more. The idea of having water hair with water books containing ships and her playing with those ships with arrogance, it shows how she holds dominion over the sea, and since she is also connected to knowledge, a book works very well as an object. But knowing that the silhouette isn't strong enough, I analyzed it and made a note that maybe I should move her hips back, similar to the pose in Concept 1. Once I know where the design is going and I'm happy with it, I go to the next step, that is to refine the drawing and prepare it for the color phase. As you can see in the final drawing, I made the adjustment I had noted, and it improves a lot. The silhouette becomes much more easier to read. It also leaves more room to make the tail more interesting, since now we see it from the front, the side, and a bit from behind. I wanted to take advantage of that by breaking up the tail silhouette with sharp shapes, giving it more aggressive and dominant touch. For the torso, I wanted to give her something like a shirt made of scales, as if it were part of her skin. And the last thing worth mentioning is the water hair. I changed its form and flow to make it even more interesting, with better variation in thickness and direction. Alright, once the sketch is finished with the final design, the next step, which is highly recommended, is to do some color test. You also need to design the color palette because colors, even though they're my least favorite part and my biggest weakness, are very important and can determine the character's mood and message. Since I struggle with this quite a bit, I have to make only a few palettes, because I have to spend a long time testing different colors with the same palette. Normally I have an idea of the mood I want to achieve, but it's very hard for me to find the right colors. That's why for this piece I only have 2 final palettes, even though I tried many colors beforehand. In fact, if you look closely, you can see some of the previous applied colors, especially in the first one on the tail. The one I decided was the most suitable is the first one. It feels like it has more harmonious colors, and the orange adds an interesting touch to the focal point. The second one isn't bad, but I feel that the red shirt draws too much attention. The colors themselves are fine, but the distribution isn't as effective. After having the colors ready, a large part of the work here is already done. In fact, this is the point where it really needs to look good, because it's time to render, but rendering won't save a bad design, so you need to make sure that by this stage everything is already solid. The basic render, which is what you saw in the time-lapse, is basically just about defining the shadows and the lights, nothing more. I chose to do a render with softer edges to better emphasize the curves and the fluidity of the character. After completing the base render, I gradually and patiently added the details, and this is how it turned out in the end. I need to emphasize, so no one gets confused, that the render part is the most visually striking but the least important. What really matters is the design. Therefore, it's important to not rely on the rendering for something to look good. So, to summarize the steps for creating a character design effectively: 1. Write the idea. 2. Draw some concepts. 3. Look for references. 4. Refine the concepts you like. 5. Finish the final design drawing. 6. Create the color palette. And 7. An optional, render. Well, that's all. I hope you enjoyed the video and the character. A big hug to everyone. Bye!